We're at time, so let's go ahead and get started today. My name is Janae and I'm with NACB and the Consultants Training Institute. Before we proceed with the June 23rd edition of the Around the Valuation World webcast, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. First, to obtain CPA credit, you must answer all the poll questions that pop up on your screen during today's webcast. If you have a subscription to AVW, you'll receive the CPA certificates within 7 to 10 business days after today's webinar. With AVW, we try to cover all the hot topics in the upcoming issues and in the industry. Within the 2 hours, we can't cover all the topics, so we do have links to other resources where you can stay current with all the different topics in the industry. If you have any questions during today's webcast, please use the Q&A feature, as those will be directed to the presenter. If you have any questions about NACB or any technical questions, please feel free to reach out to me using the chat feature. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Mel and Alina, who will get us started for today.
Thank you, Shanda, and hello, everyone. Welcome to our June show. And today we have a special lineup. We are going to have Janae Castell doing the industry headlines and updates. After that presentation, she's going to be interviewing Carla, Nunes, and Jim Harrington, and they are going to be talking about economic updates. And Stephen White is going to be interviewing Jeff Harwell. And the name of that session, if you want to practice business valuations, you have to peel the onion. After that, we have Melissa Gragg. She's going to be interviewing and having a conversation with all of our judges. And the topic for today is going to be behind the curtain, what judges read, ignore, and focus on before expert witness testimony. We also have Ed Mofrad. He's going to be interviewing Dr. Ramamoorti and Dr. Sunita Goel, and they are going to be talking about generative adversarial networks, a new frontier in AI-fueled fraud. Very interesting topic. And after that, we are going to have, at the end of the show, we are going to have Dimitri interviewing Christine M. Hollinden, and they are going to be talking about leveraging a data-driven methodology to grow your practice. So now I'm going to leave Janae Castell, and she's going to be starting our show with the industry updates. Janae?
Thank you. Great. So this is Mike Gregory's spot. Mike Gregory is busy today. He's doing some other important work, and so he asked for me to cover his presentation this morning or this afternoon. So here's me. Here's Mike. Mike put together the slides and picked out his articles for you to go through this month and to give you some of an idea of what's going on in the profession and what's out there in the news. So some of the articles that we're going to be discussing today are A Litigator's Guide to Jury Selection from the Forensic Expert Witness Association, From Generalist to Specialist by Stephen Kirkland, which appeared in the Quick Read Buzz, Women Leaders in Business and BV Offer Tips on Staff Development from BV Update from May, Cryptocurrency and Litigation Practice, Tips and Pitfalls for the Financial Forensics Practitioner, which appeared in the Value Examiner in the March-April 2025 edition. This was by Dorothy Hermanack. Tariffs and Company Value, What to Consider, and Tax Court Allows Tax Affecting Using the Delaware Chancery Method. These last two are both BV Wire articles. And today, the takeaways for you to get from a summary perspective, these takeaways. So recognizing how jury consultants work with experts, looking at the choice to become a generalist or to become a specialist or stay a generalist, identifying tips on staff development from the perspective of women who've been in the BV profession, differentiating cryptocurrency as a specialty, considering the tax impacts of tariffs on business valuation, and a tax court case using the Delaware Chancery method for S-Corps. So the first article that we have is The Litigator's Guide to Jury Consultants. And this article discussed analysis going from pre-trial all the way to post-trial items, things that can be done and that are generally done by jury consultants. And it pointed out that jury consultants significantly increase the odds of a client getting a favorable outcome in their case. It discussed, what they do from a psychology and social sciences research perspective, how it works. It discussed, that some of them are more data-driven and quantitative rather than kind of armchair psychology. This article is written from more of a proponent of the data-driven methodologies. It discussed whether or not a client should use a jury consultant, can they afford one, and kind of the considerations and the calculus involved in that decision, and referenced another article called Jury Consultant, Friend or Foe of Justice. So it referenced this article kind of going through, how to determine what the considerations are for determining whether or not jury consultants were worthwhile for clients. A jury consultant can give the client a better negotiation position for settlement in addition to the increased odds of a favorable court outcome. So the next article was by Stephen Kirkland, titled From Generalist to Specialist. And Stephen Kirkland said that the primary regret for analysts that move from being a generalist to a specialist is not making that transition sooner. He said that in his experience, he's found fewer competitors and even found those competitors being willing to refer work to each other once they get comfortable with your level of work and client care. So if there are conflicts of interest, that actually has been something that he's seen where they've referred work to each other. He's seen higher billing rates, emphasize the higher billing rates when you get into a niche that is, that you have a passion for. But he did mention making sure that you choose a niche where you've got clients that will be able to pay your rates and pay for that enhanced credibility and knowledge and specialization. He said the clients will tend to seek you out nationally. He gave some tips on marketing and kind of some good ways to go about marketing yourself and positioning yourself to take advantage of the specialization, including presentations, writing, doing specialized CPE, joining specialized industry groups or specialized groups to do with this niche, updating your web page and having a URL that deals with your specialization, using a sanitized report to repost and share on LinkedIn. So it was a good, quick article, some good points if you're considering making this move from a generalist to a specialist. The article on women leaders in BV was from it was summarizing a podcast that was done in a panelist sort of style. And the panelists discussed ways that their firms have tried to enhance staff development by providing mentorships, one-on-one advising, buddy systems, and career planning. They talked about having the mentors be people that were not necessarily, someone who had a direct report wouldn't necessarily mentor that direct report. And they would help them with things like technical as well as soft skills. The structures from these panelists were sometimes formal and sometimes more informal. And they could have assigned coaches. They could kind of do things that fit their size of firm and style of firm. They suggested engaging in team building activities, competitions, and things to strengthen camaraderie. The article discussed work-life balance and how work-life balance is an individualized concept, and that there's not a one-size-fits-all perspective on what work-life balance will be, and that can even change over the career life. So they discussed, targeting that into having an individualized plan and looking at how to have boundaries and how to get the most important priorities set out first. The next article by Dorothy Hermannack was Cryptocurrency and Litigation and Practice. It discussed the excess use of electricity and flared gas from mineral lease operators being tied together with cryptocurrency, and talked about taking the excess energy and mining cryptocurrency with it. Mentioned checking out the TV show Landman. It talked about solar and wind producing powered with a negative range down to 23 dollars per megawatt hour, and that Bitcoin users could actually get paid to use this power. The author identified 15 operational decisions that should be included in any economic analysis and considering all of the stakeholders to assess the risk. So interesting article, a little bit out of my wheelhouse there. The BV Wire articles start with the ones that Mike Gregory selected. The first one was tariffs and company value, what to consider. So increased costs are an impact for our BV engagements. Looking at a baseline, everything having maybe an increase of 10%, and even higher on specific countries and products. So there may be increased costs that we need to consider in our valuations. Because of these increased costs, if the companies don't eat them and have lower margins, if they're passing on those costs to customers, well, then we may have potentially lower demand for the business that we're valuing. There's sector-specific impacts for the international supply chain and global markets, so you need to understand how this is really impacting the specific business that you're in. And I know Carla and Jim are going to talk about that a little bit more later and talk about the different industries and how that how the tariffs appear to be affecting some of those industries. There's heightened uncertainty. So when we're looking at the valuations, the article talked about the tariffs, not even just having a numbers specific impact, but an overall increase potentially in the cost of capital. That it may alter M&A deals and structures, maybe more earnouts. Demodoran had some posts on this if you're interested to go find that. There's potential for inflation with the tariffs, and then focusing, as always, on cash flow, risk, and growth. So good quick article to read in the BB Wire if you're interested. The next article was the tax court allowing tax affecting using the Delaware Chancery method. The case was Pierce v. Commissioner, which was filed April 7th, 2025, so just a couple months ago. It was an S corp valued for gifting purposes, both sides tax affected using the Delaware Chancery method. Thinking that the hypothetical buyer in this case would be a C corp. The taxpayer's expert was felt to be more credible and reasonable by the court, and so they looked at his opinion and didn't give credibility to the IRS's outside expert in this case. They did use a hypothetical tax rate for a portion of the analysis. So interesting decision, and I know we'll be hearing a lot more about this in upcoming segments and around the valuation world. So again, here are the links. This should be in your materials to the articles that I've discussed. These great sample that Michael Gregory has put together, and he will be back with us next month to do his regular presentation. So we look forward to that and having Michael Gregory back. But in the meantime, I'm here doing my best to fill his shoes. So actually, I'm going to jump right in to the next segment, which is our economic update segment with Carla and Jim. And I know that you are most interested in hearing Carla and Jim discuss what's going on and their takes on business valuation. And Carla was interested to hear, kind of thinking, what are business valuators really concerned with? And I don't know that I have a hard, fast answer for you, but I would venture to say that, because there's so much to be worried about right now, there's just so much to think about. But I would venture to say that from a practical, operational standpoint, I think practitioners are primarily concerned with how to do work more efficiently, effectively, and correctly, and how to compete, not only with other practitioners, but at times some of these online calculators and AI as well. So, different verse of the same song, maybe. We've gotten so much better at things, but the world is spinning faster and the possibilities of what can be done are expanding exponentially. And kind of on that theme with theoretically, I think in the knowledge base side of things, there's so much happening and enormous possibility of what we can access and analyze that I think analysts are trying to figure out how to stay on top of the rapid developments in national economic policy, rate change expectations, politics that drive these changes and shape the economic environment, current and future tax regime changes, tariffs, foreign policy, global conflicts, domestic conflicts, protests, unemployment, ESG, and synthesizing all of these things to understand what is the impact, what's even noise, and what is significant. On things like multiples, if you're doing a market approach like you should be, on projections of cash flows and the cost of capital. So this is always what it has been, and always what it will be about. But I think, Carla, I'm really, and Jim, I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on distilling all of this, all the current events down into what they mean for cost of capital. So you can give us some patterns and some hope amid the chaos.
Well, Jim is an optimist, so I'm sure he'll have a positive note at the end. And you're right. I think we're trying to do the work of AI, which is like there's information overload, and Jim and I are just trying to sift through all of the information and pick the elements that we think might have an impact, which we may be wrong. It could be other things that become more important than what we're going to talk about. But I think we could see this as sort of a preview for some of the topics we would talk about at the super conference in September. We'll expand upon these. And in fact, if people think, oh, this is an area I want to hear more about, maybe put it in the chat. That would help us when we're creating the slides for the super conference. All right, so practical things. Let me see. Can I take control to move the slides?
I would love, if you want to bring them up, I would love that. Or actually, do you
or
have
I can
them? Or do you want me to
share.
do it? Yeah, do you want to share?
Sure, I can share. Hold on.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and bear everyone with us.
Yeah,
Just
sorry.
making sure.
I need to figure out how to do that allow control thing. That's
Allow
not,
control, right?
it's not
But if
my-
not, like we'll, for next time, and right now we'll just share this one presentation, and then we'll, stop sharing and we'll go from there. All right. So, can you see this? Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. So we only have like less than 20 minutes. So Jim and I are going to be very brief. And we're sort of like going to pretend you've been listening to our other economic updates from last time. And so, one of the themes we had talked about last time was the fact that economists and the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, all of these pundits were saying that the budget deficit and the national debt were on a path that was unsustainable. So fast forward since December, 6 months, are we better off or worse off? But let's see. So we're going to first just touch upon some of the big items that could have a significant impact on valuations, on certain businesses from a variety of perspectives. The first one here is the House passed, the House of Representatives, this one big beautiful bill act, OBBBA. And the question is, a lot of tax provisions there, which would impact valuations. But what would it do to the debt? And before we do that, it's like, what does it cost? What is the cost of this? And where we're going to find the money? Because if we find money to mitigate these costs, then maybe it's okay. And so this is actually a summary that you're looking at from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. And they're like a think tank that, as the name suggests, they would prefer not to have a lot of debt. in the federal balance sheets, but they looked at a variety of estimates, and they're not apples to apples. And the reason is some of these only look at the tax elements of the bill, and some will look at all of them. And the ranges of what the cost is are very different. Okay, and they could go all the way from like $2 trillion to close to $5 trillion or $4.5 trillion if some of these provisions were made permanent. In this conversation, I'm just going to, for everybody to be on the same page, when you're looking at the cost of a bill in Congress, there are two ways of looking at it. One is called the conventional estimate. And conventional means it's almost like, in math, you'd learn the term ceteris paribus. So like, all else equal. Whereas the dynamic estimate takes into account the impact on the macroeconomy. So for example, real GDP growth and inflation and interest rates. And so the costs are different whether or not you take into account these macroeconomic effects, and that's why it's called dynamic. So in these costs, it's typical for these types of bills to be looked at the budget window. What is the cost over the next budget window, which is 10 years? That's why a lot of the things you look at that you read and search in Google, etc., will be like, oh, from 2025 to 2034, because it's the next 10-year window. And so ultimately, like, we're talking about the most optimistic $2 trillion, the most pessimistic, $4.6 trillion. All of them do have an impact. What would GDP be 10 years from now? And that's the last column. And for the most part, the impact it's quite small. So there's a lot of cost involved for something that is not going to have that much impact on the economy, growing the overall pie of the economy. So that's a little bit disheartening, because you'd hope that a lot of these tax policies, for example, like bonus depreciation, R&D expensing immediately if they done in the US, things like that would have a significant impact on economic activity. But ultimately, only the tax foundation says, oh, yeah, there is a almost 1% impact that is positive, but only if you focus on tax only provisions. So if you focus on the entire bill, there's not a lot of advantage. Unfortunately, though, is like, what would the impact be then on interest rates as a result of that spending? Because as I said earlier, the United States, has been on a path of unsustainable debt increases. And in fact, we warned back in December that Moody's, the rating agency, might downgrade the US AAA rating. And it was the last agency of the big three to have the US at AAA rating. And sure enough, about a month ago, they did. So what Jim and I predicted back then happened. And not just us, others had predicted that. But the point is, there is a correlation between debt rating and interest rates that you see. Now, the US has this status as the reserve currency of the world. You can think about it as the global risk-free rate. So that in times of trouble, investors globally tend to gravitate towards buying US Treasuries, which has kept our interest rates low here in the US. But all of this uncertainty, these trade tensions, the tariffs, etc., have caused some, hesitation by some of the foreign investors in buying US Treasuries. Now, it is still the largest, most liquid market in the whole world. So we're not talking about massive changes, but we're starting to see shifts towards people holding gold, for example, and in massive amounts. Or trying to go to some other, like the Swiss or the German bonds, or trying to even going to Bitcoin. But anyway, so here's an analysis by the Yale Budget Lab, what they think, and that's the top continuous red line. They think that in the 10-year yield would look like at the end of 30 years if we enact the One Big Beautiful Bill. And they would say, well, it would reach about 4.9% versus, what the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, is expecting under current law, 3.8. So that's about 100 basis points, like almost a 1% higher cost of capital just on the risk-free rate component. Now, there are other different estimates. This is the CBO itself. The CBO said, well, that's the cost of the bill, but what is the impact on the debt? How much is the deficit going to go up? And again, and this just came out recently, so we tried to give you all the most recent data that we could, except that the Senate passed a bill, like their own version of the bill, just after we submitted the slides. So we don't have that, although a preliminary estimate by the Tax Foundation would be like something like in the $4 to $4.5 trillion anyway. So we're not talking about major shifts, but anyway. So the CBO said, hey, if we use a conventional, remember I talked about conventional versus dynamic. If we look at the conventional impact, that's on the left hand side of the screen, the increase in deficit would be about $2.4 trillion. If you include the macroeconomic effects, it would actually be the last column on the right of the table that has and that's the dynamic impact, which has the increase or decrease in the deficit. So the increase is a positive number, and they're like looking more like at $2.8 trillion. That would be the impact on the debt. So the question is how we're going to pay for that so that we don't impact interest rates. And one way, the Doge savings, we looked at that, and they are minuscule compared to the amounts of debt that we're talking about here. So the idea was that, well, it's tariffs, right? And so this is an analysis by the Richmond Feds, the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, that first said, well, let's see what the tariffs look like by major trading partners. And this is what Janae was talking about earlier. And they, I think for the known and knowable in valuations, this is actually a pretty good table because it tells you what the average, the effective tariff was by country, depending on which date you were in. So they say, okay, here's what they were in 2024 from January to March, then come April, and you had, that first hike, the Liberation Day, on April 2nd. Of course, then on April 9th, there was like a pause on these on some of the tariffs. So the reciprocal tariffs that were really high, and that date expires on July 9th. So we'll see what happens if we have enough trade deals there, whether that gets extended or that the higher tariffs pop back up again, which is sort of like that last column in May. There was also a 90-day pause on certain China tariffs, and China tends to be the one that has one of the biggest impacts because it was the highest tariff rate, number one, and they're like, the number 3 in terms of import share that we have for the United States. And so there is also a 90-day pause on a different date, but the question is what kind of trade deal we will get between now and then, if at all, is particularly with the geopolitics that is going on right now with the Israeli-Iran conflict, the U.S. Bombing the nuclear sites. Markets don't seem to be extremely worried right now, but of course this is an evolving situation. So geopolitics, politics can also play in this. And then finally, there's like a tax foundation, estimate of how much tariffs could bring. So can it offset the price tag of the big, beautiful bill, right? And so the tax foundation had two, by the way, this is a spreadsheet that is available on their website. The only thing we added, Jim and I, is that last column talking about this as percentage of total. So the spreadsheet is available for anyone to download. We always put the sources, and if you just Google the sources, the titles, you can get it yourself. And so what the Tax Foundation said was, if you look at the conventional revenue, again, no macroeconomic effects, that could be about $2 trillion of revenues that would come based on tariffs that are, as of June 2nd, that are in place. So that's actually quite a lot of money, right? To offset that, whatever that cost is, $2 to $4 trillion of the big, beautiful bill. Now, of course, a lot of the tariffs have been ruled illegal, and by illegal, this is a term used by the Tax Foundation. They're like being challenged in court, that you couldn't really impose these retaliatory or reciprocal tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, so the IEEPA. And the Tax Foundation said how much of the total, revenues we would get from tariffs is related to that versus other tariffs. And the others are like, steel and aluminum, for example, or autos. They're under a different law that they were imposed. And so those are likely to stay. So from an industry standpoint, think about those are likely to stay. And so about 70% using conventional revenue are associated with those types of, Emergency Act tariffs, which means that there's a lot of uncertainty whether these are going to stay the way they are. They can just be changed, perhaps. Maybe they're not of the same magnitude. It's still a big unknown. There's another estimate on dynamic revenue, which the amount of revenue that we would get through tariffs is only about 1.4 trillion, is a lot. I'm sorry. Yes, 1.4 trillion, 1393, that would be brought. So the point is, tariffs will not be enough to pay for the one big, beautiful bill as it stands right now, if it goes this way. And now I'm going to pass over to Jim. Jim, do you want me to?
Yeah, do I have
move the
control?
slides?
Yeah, move the slides.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting us today. Thank you, Carla, for your presentation there. That was awesome. This slide shows non-farm payroll numbers and the unemployment rate for the past 3 months. The unemployment rate is holding steady at 4.2% for the last 3 months, March, April, and May. Job creation is reasonably in line with expectation, but job creation is down a bit. Now, Carla talked a lot about uncertainty. The fact that job creation is down a bit, it might be a result of businesses waiting to see what happens with the big, beautiful bill and tariffs. And as of this weekend, we've got another variable in the mix, war. Businesses tend to hold off on hiring when faced with that kind of uncertainty. They're just sort of sitting on their hands waiting to see what happens. The revisions to the data are significant, and this might be a function of the response rates to the surveys, which have been falling for years. So it just takes them longer to get a really good view on what's going on. It takes them longer to survey the number of people they need to survey. Next slide. I just mentioned that businesses tend to put a pause on things like hiring or capital investments in the face of uncertainties. Economists do the same thing. Economists are generally less optimistic than they were in January about the US GDP growth for 20 and 25 and 2026 as they are today. Their expectations have dropped off. They pulled it in a bit, as you can see from the slide. I do want to mention there's a really good free resource out there about this kind of stuff. We produce an infographic, which is up on the Kroll site. It's a free PDF one-pager that has all kinds of information on expected economic growth rates for the US, the Eurozone, China, Canada, etc. It has inflation expectations, consumer sentiment, 10-year government bond yields, etc., and also the most up-to-date Kroll ERP and risk-free rate recommendations. You should check that out. Like I say, it's free. It's up on our site. Next slide.
And the bottom line, just one thing, is that it's about 1% down for 2025. So if you're doing 1 year,
from the
capitalization.
beginning of the year till just today, basically, or when this analysis was put together within the last week, economists have pulled in their expectations for U.S. GDP growth for both 2025 and 2026 in the face of all the uncertainty that we face today.
Okay.
Next slide. This is the 10-year government bond yields for the US, the UK, Canada, Germany, and Japan. Fairly steady, fairly steady, falling off a little bit maybe, but there is some volatility there. So what we recommend, or what you might consider doing, is using a weekly or monthly trailing average for your risk-free rates, and that'll smooth things out a little and take a little bit of that volatility out of it. Next slide. This is the 20-year U.S. Treasury yield. Carla talked about flights to quality. There was some flight to quality around April 2nd, Liberation Day, when the tariffs were announced, and you can see that yields dipped at that time as people bought. There was a flight to quality. People were buying those treasuries. But yields came back up to pretty much where they were after the 90-day tariff pause was announced, I believe, on the 9th of April. Or was it the 8th, Carla?
Yeah, there
I think it was
I think it was 9th.
Yeah. The increase in yields Carla talked about, possibly, maybe in part because of a little more hesitation by other countries of holding our debt. And if they don't buy our debt, yields tend to go up. Next slide. PCE, that's the red line there at the bottom. That's the preferred inflation gauge of the Fed. Now, the more famous measure of inflation, CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is the green line. Now, there's a little uptick. There was a little uptick in CPI in May, and it really wouldn't surprise me to see a little uptick, see the PCE sort of mirror that uptick on its next print. Next slide. Now, this is a graph of all the raises and lowerings that the Fed has done through monetary policy over the last years. You can see from September to December of last year, the Fed did cut rates 100 basis points. Since then, since December, they've been on pause. The FOMC just concluded its June meeting. They held rates steady at the 425 to 450 range. And let's look at the next graph, and we'll look at what the market is expecting for Fed rate changes in the future. The Fed has meetings in July, September, October, and December left for this year. That dark blue line up at the top represents the market's expectations for rate cuts. The market right now doesn't anticipate a rate cut at this next meeting, the July meeting. But there are consensus expectations for about 2 rate cuts during this year, but those are not expected until the fall. Okay, so we're going to skip July probably, and we do still expect 2 rate cuts in the fall. Next slide. This is the S&P 500 index year to date. In the middle there, that big dip, you can see the big 12% drop off after April 2nd when the tariffs were announced. That was very sudden, very dramatic, 12% in the S&P, even more in some, like the NASDAQ, almost 20%. After the 90-day pause was put in effect on April 9th, the market has recovered a little, or significantly actually, and we're only down about 3% from the all-time highs we reached back in February 19th. We are up about 1.7% for the year, but that doesn't really compare favorably with 2024 when we were up 23% for the year. There's a couple dates to keep in mind. Carla already mentioned these. Remember the pause for the reciprocal tariffs, or a lot of the tariffs, those end July 9th. And there's another set that end on August 10th for China specifically. The market, believe me, will have those dates in mind and probably will react either favorably or unfavorably, depending on whether things have been sort of settled by then, or at least have the appearance of gonna be settled. So those two dates, July 9th and April 10th, are something that you and the market are going to keep in August 9th, August 10th are the dates that you and the market, believe me, are front of mind, top of mind, and we'll see how that turns out.
And this is like there's only a couple of slides left, and very quickly, which is really just given this uncertainty, like what are the sectors that are doing best and which ones are doing worse? Surprisingly, industrial sector is actually the one performing the best, but consumer discretionary, as you would expect, is actually the worst performer thus far, because if you don't know if you're going to have enough purchasing power, you stop purchasing things that are considered not essential. And that actually, this is the final slide for our section, which is an analysis by the Richmond Fed again, where they actually looked at the industries that seem to be most impacted by tariffs, and depending on the date. Remember the known and knowable? And so, we're not going to go through this, but at the bottom, the industries most impacted are things like textiles, apparel, leather actually is like a lot of, if you think about SIC codes, is like shoes, for example, impacts a lot. So shoes and clothes are very impacted. Fabricated metals, because of the aluminum and steel. So anything that uses fabricated metal is being impacted, not just autos, but the tariffs have just been extended for example, washing machines and the metal components that go into the washers and the dryers and the dishwashers, etc. So those are going to be most impacted, as well as some agricultural activities, because if you think about the avocado from Mexico, and the tomatoes and all these other things, some of them are subject to tariffs. So this is their analysis, but I find it useful if you're dealing with specific industries in your valuations to take a look at this type of analysis, and you can download it again from the website. So a lot more to come. Really, thank you for your time and listening to us. If there are sections that you like that will be extended in our session, Jim and I talking in September, please let us know. We'll try to address some of those. And honestly, this is like every day could be something new.
That's right. So, and by September, we're going to be past those two big dates.
Right.
For the tariffs, the big tariff 90-day expiration in July. For the reciprocal tariffs, and then in August 10th for the China. And we'll have a lot more information and probably a little bit clearer idea, the market will and we will, about what to expect here. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Jim. This is always amazing information and constantly changing. So it's a gift to have you here.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim and Carla. Just really quickly before we go on to the next session, just want to let you guys know that the nomination form for the 2025 30 under 30 honorees is up. So if you know anybody who qualifies, please submit your nominations for them. And with that, I'm going to turn the time back over to Mel, who will get us started for the next session.
Chinda, if I'm over 60, can I put my name in twice and that cuts it?
You could nominate. See if we select it.
All right, let's jump to the next session with Stephen White. Stephen White's gonna be spending some time with Jeff Harwell talking about if you want to practice valuations, you have to peel the onion. I mean, we got to dig in, we got to do the work, and I think that's where this is going to go. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Stephen and Jeff, and looking forward to this session.
Well, good afternoon. Good morning to everyone. I'm excited to be here today with Jeff. For those of you who are not familiar with Jeff, Jeff is a CVA MAFF, and he's also an equipment certified appraiser. He has extensive experience in the M&A space. He has an MBA from Neely School. But most importantly, the reason why Jeff is here today to talk to us, he actually has a session that's coming on shortly after today. He's going to do an in-depth deep dive into, as Mel mentioned, as far as where you want your practice to go. And it's kind of the premise of behind it is how to peel that onion, which I like that term. Jeff and I had an opportunity to chat briefly before this session, and I shared with him some of the things that we deal with here at OPG, with having some that have a finance background and then some that have an accounting background, and how do we blend those two things together and looking at it from a different perspective. So, Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you. How are you today?
Doing well. Thank you, Stephen. And
Right.
hello to everyone out there in the valuation world.
So tell us, let's start off with this. Start off with, how did that title come up? Peeling back the onion, what made you get to that point? And then we'll dive into some of the things that the audience will be able to participate in during your session, more in-depth session later on this afternoon.
Well, that's kind of an interesting question, and I will answer it this way. When I was thinking about a topic, we always think a lot of times when we put together a presentation. I wanted to do a presentation. I just got over and just celebrated a 1-year anniversary on a kidney transplant. And I was thinking, okay, well, I'll put something out there for the annual conference. And I put together a presentation because it had really been bothering me, a lot of things that we do in valuation, a lot of things that people are forgetting about, a lot of misinformation. I used to sit back in the back and I'd listen to experts like Mel, and I just sat there and not question anything. But then I started looking at how long I've been doing valuations based upon referral, the litigation and everything that I've done, including owning businesses, selling businesses. Own my own business and selling my own businesses, my consulting role. But I've always done valuation from the day that I finished grad school. And I've had my industry experience, but most of the time I've been in practice, either on a full-time basis or at least part, but I've never ceased to do valuations. And I've looked at this and I coach during the week. I give my time up working with Value Source NACVA, coaching our members and our candidates. And I just got to a point where I was a little frustrated about some of the attitudes in our profession, and I take our profession very seriously. So I wanted to put together a presentation going over valuation from A to Z, and I started thinking about it. And I said, what can I do with this? And I guess a little bit during the pandemic and everything else, I was eating well. Mel knows all about that. And I was thinking about different things, and I was doing all this own cooking, doing stuff in an Instapot, and the thing came up with, what's the deal with an onion? Well, you really have to think about it. And, you got to peel it, and then you got to figure out what you're going to do with it, and everything else just unwinds. So that's how the topic became my topic into the valuation. But it's probably a little light thing, but it's still an important concept from, the onion. Do you really understand it? And when I did this at the conference, I'll say this, just as a teaser. I asked the audience at our last annual conference, which ends up on the onion, which is the top, which is the bottom. And I got deer in a headlight. And I'm going to tell you that I think we get deer in a headlight sometimes in valuation if I ask a question, and that's not good. So that's where we got the peeling of the onion, and we'll just start from there, and we'll do that later today.
So when you say that, it brings to mind some of the aspects, things that we already know, and I think sometimes we take for granted. And I say we as an association, understanding this, it's simplest things that is the standards of value. And I'm sure that comes up in conversation sometimes. Exactly. Do you really even understand why you're choosing that particular standard of value? Not even to the point of which approach should you use? Should you use income? Should you use asset approach? Is asset approach even appropriate? Are those going to be some of the things that you go into in depth and walking through during this session?
Absolutely. That's one of my pet peeves. We have people out there walking around and they really believe the only standard of value we have is fair market value. They really believe that. And somehow or another, they're indoctrinated with it. And that's a real danger. That's a real danger if you're in litigation. That's a real danger if you're doing estate planning, gift. There's just so many types of questions that you've got to know that standard of value. And if you don't know that when you very begin, then you might as well not even do the valuation because you're wrong right out of the gate. You're going to come up with the wrong number.
let me ask you something, and without going too in depth into this, because I know during your sessions, then you're always open to have questions thrown at you because of the mere fact that as valuators, we should feel like we're in a community where we could always ask questions and not necessarily challenge one another, but at least get you to think about things in a different perspective instead of thinking things in a linear way. Where does critical thinking come in? How do you apply that as far as your overall valuations?
Another one of my topics, and that's one of the hopes and the goals of the webinar that we're going to do. And in my presentation, I think critical thinking is important. We can't go through valuation as valuation analysts and professionals and grow unless we're doing critical thinking and asking questions and why, and question every little thing. Why are we doing this way? Is it right? And those are things that we need to examine because there's a lot of almost myths that people are carrying around with them. So you have to ask a question.
So give me a question that you would, on that same topic, that you're probably going to pose out to the audience afterwards, just to give everyone kind of understanding what you mean by that.
Okay. How about a true and false question? The asset approach sets the floor of value.
Okay. So let's just say that I'm out in the audience and I'm going to say yes. And I
And
know
I'll
that there
say,
are a number of people out there who would agree with me, but I know differently. But so what would you say?
and I will say, who told you that? And you can go back and tell them that I told them they're wrong. In business, in the world, the real world in business brokerage, businesses are sold at asset value. I go through the whole around the years, and a lot of my valuations will come down to asset value. Remember, we've got a lot of businesses that are selling and making a living at just a 2 and 3% profit margin. And a lot of them have stuffed up their assets. They've never really got efficient. And there's no telling what else they're doing. And here's another one. In the asset value, our professionals are believe one way or the other trained that the asset value is the adjusted book value is the going concern. And this is a real misnomer. I think I even had one of my instructors that missed it because the asset going concern value is not just the adjusted book value. Anybody can do that or get close to that. But that definition of adjusted book value, if we go to the International Glossary of Business Valuation terms, says you got to have intangible added to it. Well, what's that intangible? Every valuation that I see, adjusted book value going concern method, it has no intangibles in there. And what's the most important thing? People say when they do the work in the business, they say that people are my most important asset, but there's no people on that balance sheet. Absolutely none. Where's the workforce in place? It's the biggest one that you miss. And that's one you got to have per our profession, per the International Glossary of Business Valuation terms. There's no worker bees. Its definition should be as if in orderly liquidation, not going concern. It's not a going concern without the people. That's a misnomer. And if you add that, the workforce in place in a lot of businesses, that asset value really grows.
And that is something that I truly believe that is missed across the board. And I don't know where that starts or how it begins. Someone just threw in the chat, remember the excess earnings method? I still use it as a method in one ESOP case. But I do believe the asset approach is one that is a little confusing to a number of different people. But if you look at the three approaches, which one do you believe is probably utilized the most, but could create more of an issue?
Which method is used the most?
Yes.
Without a doubt, with our profession, they automatically go to the income approach every time, because I think they're comfortable with it based upon their background. Maybe their training. Maybe they're indoctrinated to it.
It is interesting. And you know what? If we do that and we focus our attention there, it's just about how are you applying it to your overall report. So I know that later on you're going to walk through a number of different examples of describing how to utilize the asset approach, your thoughts on utilizing the asset approach, as well as the income approach and the market approach, and looking at where those values are actually coming from. During this session, you're also going to have handouts. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There'll be multiple handouts. I think it's 4 pages.
Okay. Okay. So we're engaging. We want everyone to be more engaged in this overall session versus any other type of platform that we've tried to put out for the association. This is truly one that we want the audience to kind of, even though it's virtual, have it more like an in-person setting for you to roll up your sleeve and start asking questions. It's not necessarily the challenge, but also understand why you're thinking things in a particular way. Now, Jeff, I value your opinion out there, and I know when you're going to share your thoughts because you've been doing this for a number of years. But there are those that have different mindsets as far as how they actually do the evaluation report because that's how they've been taught, depending on the firms that they've been at. Is that correct?
Correct. But again, it got to go back to your question about critical thinking. Maybe they need to act critical thinking about their report. You know, I'm not the expert. I've only met a few experts in my life, and even in the valuation world, they had. And I'm not one of those experts. So the expectation of me being an expert is improper. I'm like everyone else. I'm still a 74-year-old student. I'm still learning. I'm still finding out changes in my report, changes in my way of thinking. Things do change. But what I'm looking for is more precision. Be precision evaluation. But for my client's sake, for my own sake and my own interest, I'm looking for more ways to get to a little level of precision. Things that I want to make sure of. And one of those things that drives me is at the end of our report, when we reach a conclusion of value or a calculated value, I want to see those numbers, the asset approach, the income approach, and the market approach. I want to see those aligning up as best they can. I want to see the multiple approaches to corroborate whichever method I selected, or even if I did some weighting, not just some average weighting, but if there was some way in my thought process that I wanted to weight, I at least want a approach to corroborate my selected method. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
So that's critical, and I want to, and I can find through critical thinking, how many times the way I do the valuations, how many times did I get to the end and I looked at the numbers, looked at the quantitative numbers, the qualitative factors that I went through in my evaluation, and I said, there's something wrong here. I missed something. And 9 times out of 10, I missed something. I'm not perfect. And I go dig until I find out what I missed.
I think that when we go through your session, it will obviously spur on a lot of thought, a lot of conversations, different takeaways that the audience will be able to take away from your particular session. You're going to go over some of the KPIs, and I think that's all obviously the key points that they should be taking away from the overall session later on today. I know that we are right at the top of the hour, and our next guest is going to come on. I encourage everyone to log in and go into this particular session. Jeff is going to go through more of an in-depth and truly have an understanding of how to peel back the onion when it comes down to valuation. We all could learn a little something new instead of doing the same thing over and over again. We know what that definition is called. So Jeff, thank you very much for your time today. And I'll turn it back over to Mel, I believe, or Elena.
Thank you, Stephen.
All right.
Let me just jump in.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Stephen. And Chinda.
Really quick.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. As I mentioned, there is the ABW on that webinar that starts at 4 p.m. Eastern today. So if you want to register for that, for joining us on ABW today, you can receive a 20% discount on the registration. So when you register, use ABW in-depth 20 to receive that discount. And with ABW in-depth, we are expanding on some of our topics each month. For this month, it is Jeff Harwell's presentation. We also have July 21st, the adding transfer pricing reports to your practice. And then in November, we are going to have the Lawyer's Business Valuation Handbook, the 3rd edition. So if you're interested in any of those, there's a QR code. Scan that or visit the nacv.com/ABW in depth for more information. And then also, before we get started about the next session with the judges, just want to go over our conference. Our conference will be in September, September 11th and 12th in Salt Lake City. For more information about that, there is a QR code there as well. So hope to see you guys all there. And with that, I'll just turn it back over to Mel.
Thanks, Chinda. And we're on to our next topic, which is one of the crowd favorites with our judges panel with Judge Driscoll. I see Judge Platt and Judge Yates here. And Melissa Gragg is going to spend a bit of time kind of going behind the curtain, what judges read, ignore, and focus on before expert testimony. Melissa is a valuation professional in St. Louis, high net worth divorces, complex financial calculations, and has been in the business a while. Melissa, welcome aboard. I'll let you introduce the judges in your session and take it away.
Yeah, this is awesome. So we're going to be getting a little kind of behind the scenes look at what a judge is actually doing with our reports. And we do have Judge Driscoll, Judge Platt, and Judge Yates, I think, is also here, if I saw everyone correctly. So, and I think they don't need really a huge introduction. And I don't know if we want to just be showing our faces while we do this, but essentially, we want to know what they're really looking at. So I don't know who's going to get us teed up, but one of the first questions that we're going to talk about is, when this expert report lands on your desk before trial, what do you actually look at first? And maybe even when do you start reviewing information, depending upon, the case specifics and such. So Judge Platt, I see that you are front and center, so maybe we'll start with you. You're still muted, but
my significant other, by the way, likes it when I'm mute. But that said, frankly, I don't recall a whole lot of expert reports landing on my desk before a hearing at all, because of the evidentiary issues that might arise in the event that it was offered in that form. That said, if it's a court trial, many times there's an agreement to do that, and then it would be on my desk by agreement. I'll also throw in and I'll pull it back in a minute for a further discussion, perhaps later. Doing what I do now as a mediator and as an arbitrator, a report is much more likely to be on my desk in advance because of the submission that has been made by one side or the other in advance by agreement, either in and I can't imagine the report being in confidence. Somebody might think it is, but it doesn't stay that way very long. So the answer to the question is, one, what are we doing? Are we having a court trial? Or are we having a jury trial? And if we're having a jury trial, to be honest, I don't think the report's going to be on my desk unless it's created an evidentiary issue. And the answer to the next question is, what do I look at first? Assuming, and I'm not assuming, particularly with the more rigorous standards that are now in place, that the qualifications of the author of the report are not an issue, and that there is a stipulation, or at least not an objection, to looking at it. So we're not looking at qualifications if they're not an issue, because we got enough to look at that are an issue. If that's not an issue, the first thing I look at would be methodology, and because I've had and again, you get all kinds of submissions on methodology. You mentioned in mediations or arbitrations or even court trials. than you would with a jury. So that's my answer to my long-winded answer to your short question.
Yeah, and we may flip around and talk more about mediation because that is an interesting area that also you would be submitting reports. But maybe Judge Yates can give us a little bit of an idea of, are you looking at this significantly before trial? Are you flipping right to certain areas, or what's your process?
Well, let me start by explaining the civil process, because when a case gets filed, we don't typically see very much until somebody puts something in front of us. So the first time I'm going to be looking at something involving an expert is either first, if somebody makes a challenge to the expert under Daubert, then I'm going to have to take a look at everything at a pretrial hearing. And what I'll do then is I'll look at the CV first, because the challenge at Daubert, of course, is that somebody's either we don't need expert testimony, or this person isn't an expert, or there's something defective about their methodology. And so I have to consider all those issues myself as a gatekeeper before the case even goes to trial. So whether it's a jury trial or a bench trial, I'll be looking at that first. If nobody challenges the qualifications of an expert to testify and the opinions the expert intends to offer, then in all likelihood, the first time I'll see what an expert's likely to say is in a trial brief. And I get trial briefs, whether it's a jury trial or a bench trial, almost all the time in the business docket. And that's really the lawyer's explanation of what I'm likely to see at trial. And I'll get a preview of what the expert's likely to say. I don't particularly like a lot of attachments to trial briefs. And as Judge Platt said, there's an evidentiary problem with us taking a look at expert reports before anybody's offered them into evidence or they've been stipulated for admission at trial. So typically, an expert needs to be concerned about what the retaining counsel is saying in the trial brief. You don't want that to be a misrepresentation of either your credentials or what your opinion is likely to be. So I would ask your retaining counsel before trial starts whether there's going to be a trial brief filed, and if there is, what you're going to say about the expert and what the expert's opinions will be. Then if the case goes to trial, particularly if it's a bench trial, it's not uncommon for the parties to want to stipulate that the reports come in. And in a bench trial, I wouldn't worry so much about that. I'd be glad to take them by stipulation, even though technically there's a hearsay problem with reports coming in. Usually the expert has to offer the theory in live testimony at trial, not just in the form of a report. But when I finally get to the report, if I can read the report, as Judge Platt was explaining, I go to the methodology first, because I want to understand whether the two experts are even approaching the valuation issue in the same way. If they are, that makes my life a lot easier. If they're choosing different methodologies, then I'm going to have to dig in a little bit and do some studying beforehand. And I'll leave it at that. I see Judge Driscoll is waiting in the bullpen, warmed up and ready to go. So I'll let him take it from there.
Okay, thank you. And it's so great to be with all you. As I'm looking around at my colleagues, I noticed this is a first in the history of our AVW monthly segments in that none of your not so humble judges are wearing neckties today. And I'll tie that into a teaching point later on, I promise. Right now, it's really an homage to the fact that it's 9,000 degrees in the Northeast, and the air conditioning in my chambers was not working, or the courthouse was not working. So this is the first time I've been in front of you without a tie on, and I'm feeling a little, but I'm feeling comforted by my colleagues, and we didn't even check out on this. So a couple of things, couple of points that are worth reiterating. One is that, again, expert reports are inadmissible hearsay, so we're not seeing them unless counsel agree that we should see them. Now, I push counsel because I say to counsel, I don't just want your arguments. I want to know what the experts are actually saying. So I think it's incumbent upon the judge to do that. And I do say that to my brother and sister judges when I do training of how to try complex cases. But from the perspective of the expert, you're not assured that your wonderful expert report is being reviewed by the judge. I'm going to dissent a little bit from my colleagues on what the first thing they review is, and maybe they're both much smarter than me, but it's clear they're both much smarter than me because they go to the meat and potatoes of this. I go to the executive summary at the beginning because I want to get the full picture. So I love the 2 to 3 page summary at the beginning of the report. Here's the methodology I used. I used the discounted cash flow because based on the discounted cash flow, these were the following inputs I used. This was my conclusion because it gives me an analytical starting point for what I'm actually going to be looking at. And then I do exactly what Judge Yates and Judge Platt do. I want to see that expert report on my desk because that expert report, as Judge Platt said, is the fulcrum for settlement. And as you've all heard me say, I get affirmed 100% of the time on the cases I settle. So I really want to have that report in front of me. It's also essential for me to be on the edge of my seat, not just figuratively, but literally during trial for any evidentiary issues, as Judge Yates mentioned, the Daubert issues that might come up, or just the exciting issues, and I really do mean exciting issues that come up with valuation. So I really do want it on my desk. As Judge Yates and Judge Platt said, it doesn't necessarily get on the desk unless counsel agree or unless the judge pushes counsel to agree.
Well, and I think that this wasn't really a setup of questions, but it is to showcase the importance of the fact that you might be testifying before somebody's looking at your report. So if we're looking at what the judges have already said, now let's look at live expert testimony. And what are we looking for in there if literally you're sort of following along with the report potentially at the same time as testimony? So what are we looking for if expert testimony is the first thing that we hear and it's sort of the report is something that we may review later? Judge Platt,
so I promised you I would mention my lack of necktie. When you're in the courtroom, I don't care if it's 1,000 degrees in there, look like it's a formal proceeding. And so I never have my robe on other than anything other than a tie. As I said, I'm feeling very bare right now. But look like it is a formal proceeding. Look like you're respecting the majesty of the courtroom. I think that's just so important. Even if you've been doing this for 30 years or 40 years or however long you're doing it. So that's one. The second is, and we say this so often, and I know that Michael Kaplan also shares it, and Melissa, you've said it also, is to be a teacher first and foremost. So don't go quickly, even if it's something like the back of your hand, even if something that retaining counsel is, yeah, I know it, I'm sure the judge knows it. Take your time to be a teacher, because we are generalists and we do a lot of this. We do a lot of business valuation, but yet it's not all that we do. So take us through in baby steps and don't be afraid to define terms, even if you believe them to be well known by everybody, according to whatever your operational definitions are.
Well, one of the things that I do, and I think probably my colleagues as well, is if there is a definite difference in the methodology used by the expert to arrive at his or her opinion, then what they may not say in their report, but probably should, if you know there's going to be that difference, it would behoove you to either in oral testimony for sure, if you didn't do it in the report, explain why you chose the methodology that you chose. I've had everything from I had a case in which the evaluation was essentially of a lot of arguably valuable artwork, and one of the experts said the reason I used that evaluation is because the insurance company always uses that evaluation, that method of evaluation. And we use it not only in artwork, but we use it in everything. That is, to say the least, not persuasive. And I'm sitting there thinking, I hope you got a better explanation than that, but apparently you don't. And unless the other side's explanation is equally bad, then so you may, and that sometimes happens where you're choosing between the worst of both worlds. And one solution to that, by the way, which I've actually done on occasion, is send it back to be redone, period. But that said, the methodology, not just the methodology, but why, particularly if the other side is saying that's not the right methodology, and that's why I didn't use it. And so either get ready to explain it or explain it, one or the other. The sooner the better, because it's always better to be able to anticipate the problem, but you may not know it's a problem until it's too late to deal with it. And there's that effort, by the way, to put the two to three experts in the same, for lack of a better way to put them. I can't remember the phrase right now, but put it in the you can help me, Judge.
Hot tubbing.
Hot tub.
Hot tubbing.
Yeah.
With the weather being what it is, nobody wants to go into a hot tub right now.
Right.
But that's going to become even more important if you do that.
And I would suggest, particularly if you're in front of a jury, but also if you're in front of a judge, work with your retaining counsel on trying to present what you want the trier of fact to reason through sequentially. We have to write findings of fact, conclusions of law, and render a verdict in bench trials. And I always write those in paragraph form. And it's pretty common that people will want to submit post-trial briefs, and then we'll go back to the transcripts. And nothing is more helpful to me in writing my findings of fact, conclusions of law, and verdict than to have the expert walk me through step by step from start to finish how you want me to reason this out. So start out by defining the problem, then explain the methodology that you're going to use to solve the problem, then walk me through your application of the methodology, and then clearly and succinctly explain the conclusion you want me to draw. Boy, does that make it easy for me to write my opinion.
Well, and I think that you're bringing up a lot of valid concepts, because sometimes it's very helpful to even present a one-page summary of the other expert's conclusions, your expert conclusions, and where are the differences? Like, oh, all of these are kind of similar, but here are the two big issues. Also, in litigation, we can do reports in any fashion that we would like. And so I think what we're hearing is the more it is bigger picture, maybe less voluminous in some capacity. But Judge Platt kind of talked about something that I think is interesting, which could be judicial mediation. And so are you guys getting into a situation where you're mediating something before it's going to trial? And or, what would be some suggestions of things to leave out of the report? Like, what do you ignore? What do you don't care about, kind of thing?
We care about everything.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, I don't think it's good advice to ignore anything, because if you ignore something, it's likely the other side will point out you ignored it and they didn't. And then it creates a drama that probably shouldn't exist.
I guess I would quote the book of Michael Kaplan also, that in chapter 13, verse 32, which is that, if there's a weakness in your report, better for you to acknowledge it, because you're an expert, you're not an advocate. So put everything in there. And then if the other side's expert says something, okay, yeah, they may have a point. Here's why I think I'm better, but they may have a point. I think you get a lot of street creds with the judge for that.
Yeah, and returning to the first point that you made, Melissa, we love summaries. You heard Judge Driscoll talk about going to the executive summary, and if I'm being honest with myself, if I can dig the methodology out of the executive summary, that's all to the good. I tell people when they're writing briefs on appeal, I'm now a Court of Appeals judge, explain to me in 1 or 2 pages from start to finish why you win. And I would say it's at least as important, if not more important, for the expert to do that at trial. If you can give me a quick summary of the differences between you and the opposing expert and why I should credit your methodology or your analysis or your assumptions, boy, you're a long way ahead then. we would much prefer to read something that explains it in a nutshell than to have to dig through 300 pages to get the answer.
Well,
I think we can all tell you we're going blind in these jobs. I mean, I have to get a new prescription about every 2 years from all the reading.
well, and I think we spend so much time putting these huge reports together, but what we're hearing is like simple summaries, logic. A logic is like sometimes missed in litigation, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't make sense, right? If you can't explain it sort of simply, but what you're gearing towards is that the testimony is maybe even more important than the report. Would that be an accurate assumption, or are you then going back to the report to get some things that you missed in the testimony?
I think that's right, Melissa. I think, but being able to take me through this voluminous report is spot on. Just as Judge Yates said, we are reading all the time. I might miss something in an 80-page expert report. I don't think I'd miss it in a 3-page summary, but I might miss the thing you want me to have. And so that's why live testimony is so essential. The reason that I push for the admissibility of at least in a bench trial, of the expert report is I want that belt and suspenders. I want to have the comfort down the road, a couple of weeks after I've heard the live testimony. Oh yeah, that's right. There is some support for that. Here it is on page 62 of the report.
I would also say that, and my colleagues here can attest to that, I've yet to meet a trial court judge of general jurisdiction who has time to read 500-page reports every day.
Right.
And that assumption, other than the motivation for doing that, other than an hourly fee, is not a justification for it. And the other thing is, you're hiring counsel. I'll confess, there are times where my ruling on dispositive motions was geared by who I was thinking would defend it if I did it. And if you want, as an expert, to be sure that the hiring counsel understands your report and doesn't make an argument that doesn't make any sense with your report being the subject matter of the argument. And I've seen it many times. So it's not something you just assume that he or she understands it. And you may want to, if you can, diplomatically take a look at what their argument's going to be, orally or in writing, as to what your report says and what it means, particularly with methodology.
Well, and I think Mike Gregory kind of always talks to us about like full estate planning reports to do a good summary, put a letter to the IRS so that they know what they're getting involved in. It almost feels like the judges are also kind of recommending that we do a more voluminous, executive summary, like more bullet points, more easier to read of these big highlighted areas. And I think that is an excellent suggestion for everyone.
Right. And the threshold test that meets for sure is threshold test number 1, do no harm. Couldn't possibly do any harm.
Right.
Secondly,
Absolutely.
it might help. That ought to be sufficient motivation right there.
Yeah, and even pointing through, I think another thing that is important on the stand is creating the report so that it goes in the logical order that you would testify.
Exactly.
So that you're walking through it, and literally you can just be paging through in the same manner. So if it's awkward, like if you have that beginning part of the report and you're going with that would be very succinct. And then you could go into detail later, right?
Yep.
And if you're testifying and you have to lead through your report to answer every question, you're not effective.
Correct. Any other suggestions of how or what parts of the report we should really bolster with evidence and supporting? Like, are you looking at the discounts for how they're supported, or are you just assuming that there's a discount?
We don't assume anything. We don't assume anything. So if there's a discount, explain it. Explain why your discount might, if yours is, 6.2% and the opposing expert is 6.5%, it doesn't sound like a lot, but played out over time, obviously it does. So explain it, explain why it's important, and then give us the math behind it.
We don't even assume you should wear a tie.
Well, I think that all of those are absolutely helpful. I think it's important to understand when you're going to testify that maybe nobody has read the report before you testify. And it's an important, like we weren't trying to surprise you with that, but it's an important thing to understand that your verbal testimony may be the first time that somebody's hearing this. And so you're not re-summarizing a report, you're really presenting it for the first time, and the report is the summary that they can then refer to afterwards.
Yeah, if I can add a point to that, particularly in jury trials, and I think there are fewer and fewer jury trials in complex cases where you have valuation disputes, but if you have a jury trial, you can absolutely assume that the jury's hearing it for the first time when you're on the stand and testifying. It might be different in a bench trial, but boy, I mean, you have to start out simple and keep it simple if you're trying to explain this to a jury, because there's no reason to believe that they'll have your report back in the jury room when they're deliberating either.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's where judicial mediation, because I think we've kind of gone through, is going to be important in the future, because you would have the same judge looking at things, looking at the report, asking some questions, and it's a good pre-trial, if you will, before you get to actual trial. So,
and to emphasize what Judge Yates said and to follow up on it, it is not 100% likely, but it is not unlikely that the court's instructions in a jury trial could be shaped to a certain extent by the expert reports and what he or she bought into at the time. And that should not be, so that ought to be something that is paid attention more than it is by both counsel and, to the extent the counsel allows you to assist, by the expert.
Well, and I think even putting together even a 1 or 2 page summary after the court for the facts and findings, like for your attorney to submit, so that there is a good summary of what you did in that report, like these summaries. And with ChatGPT, I'm not saying that you should use it for always, but it could be a way that you're summarizing these things, that taking very complex information and dwindling it down to more palatable pieces.
Yeah,
so
that should motivate a note, at least a note of appreciation, if not an additional fee.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, I think Mel came in here and snuck in, but
I'm here.
Okay,
Yep.
gotcha. Well, we
Hey.
appreciate it, judges. I think we covered this
Thank
topic
you.
very sufficiently.
Yep. Thank you, as always.
No.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you to
Okay.
Melissa
All right.
and our
I'm good.
judges that are always available for us and to teach us a lot of great information for where we do litigation support engagements. And now, some of you have been asking about polling questions, so we have the number 4 in front of us. You can respond to that one. But now we are going to have one of our correspondents, Ed Mofrad. He's going to be interviewing Dr. Goel from Siena College and Dr. Ramamoorti from University of Dayton. So, Ed, you can take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you. So can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for the awesome introduction, as always, Melina. It is my pleasure indeed to be interviewing Dr. Suri and Dr. Sunita, as I'm getting used to calling them. I go by their first names. They're amazing people, amazing, charismatic dispositions. Dr. Sunita is from the Siena College. Dr. Suri is from the University of Dayton. They're both on the East Coast, and I am, of course, on the West Coast. But it's been great preparing for this with them, working with them. They are truly venturing into new frontiers, not just AI, but forensics into AI, which is truly the forefront of this technology. So it really does give me honor and pleasure to be interviewing them today. Good morning, Dr. Sunita. How are you today?
Good. And are you able to hear me?
I'm able to see and hear you perfect, but I don't see Dr. Sri. Is Dr. Sri here?
Yes, yes. I just spoke to him. He was already here. Now he is rejoining just to make sure, because I think he's using the link that was recently shared right before the meeting. So he just wants to make sure. But no, oh, here he is. Yes, we see him.
Hi, Dr. Sri.
Hello.
We were talking behind your back before you joined. We were saying about you, but now that you're here, we can't do that anymore. How are you?
Very good, very good. Thank you.
It is my pleasure. I was just kidding, of course. I was just saying that it is giving me pleasure and honor to be interviewing such great pioneers. You and Dr. Sunita, your names probably go down in history as pioneers in this technology. You are going where no man has gone before, forensics in AI. So let's get this started without any further ado. I know you've prepared a wonderful set of slides that you're going to take us through as we go through this interview process. Why is AI or artificial intelligence, AI-fueled fraud so dangerous? And why is it so difficult to detect? This is a question that I'm sure everybody in every industry, whoever uses computers or AI has. So please, which one of you wants to start? Take us through this.
Well, I'll take that question, and I'll have my colleague, Dr. Goel, chime in. And so she's going to show on the slide deck that we prepared the spike in AI-fueled fraud over the last couple of years. And it is really a spectacular rise all over the world. And the Philippines kind of takes the cake as the maximum number, followed by Vietnam, and then the United States is not far behind. It's very close to Vietnam. And among other countries where I was a little surprised is here's that slide, so you can see the explosive growth of AI-powered fraud. And those numbers indicate the percentage kind of increase. And this is by an organization called SumSub Identity Fraud Report in 2023. And yeah, so it's amazing. The increase is like unbelievable, and it's mostly because of things like deep fakes, the ability to create synthetic identities that simply cannot be distinguished from real identities. So they pass muster, and they're so convincing that they avoid detection. So that's and I'm going to have Dr. Goel tell us a little bit more about the other two sections of this slide on how some sectors are targeted more and how IT leaders are really not as confident as we would like for them to be.
Yes, please, Dr. Sunita. This is indeed worrisome because, again, we all use this. We all have confidence that we're dealing with a state-of-the-art intelligence system. And it's really hard to detect that, oh my gosh, you're suspected fraud. So do share your knowledge with us.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shri. Thank you, Ed. So like Dr. Shri explained, we have this frauds out there, and what fraudsters are doing is that they are exploiting synthetic identities, which are created using a mix of real and fake information. So it is very difficult to discern between what is real and what is fake, and then they combine that with deepfake technology to impersonate individuals, and what they're doing is these synthetic profiles behave so convincingly that they bypass like conventional identity verification measures or even anomaly-based detection systems, and interestingly, like in 2019, scammers used artificial intelligence to simulate the voice of a CEO and directed financial institutions to transfer the funds, which was unauthorized. And but it happened. So
oh my gosh.
yes.
I know you just gave us a general example, but could you break it down into a more specific example, like a typical unknowing person gets on a computer? What are some real life examples that you've known specifically?
So one particular example, and this is, if you go back, Dr. Goel, to the article, this is the article where, we really got a lot of good insights from Richard Chambers, the former global president of the Institute of Orders. He wrote this very nice, article on AI-enabled fraud schemes. And so, he reports how there was the use of deepfake videos and synthetic voice clones of a CFO that made someone transfer millions of dollars to a Hong Kong account. Only later they found out that that CFO was not even in the country where he was supposed to be and from where he spoke. And so it was so convincing that obviously the employee just went ahead and transferred because he thought he's getting a direct order from the CFO. And then, there was a case of where AI is becoming so good in voice cloning. It takes like 30 seconds and it'll clone your voice. It doesn't take much time. There was a case of this mother. She thought she was talking to her daughter, when in fact, her daughter's voice was being cloned by AI. And she actually thought she was speaking to her own daughter. And so if you can fool a mother about her own daughter, I think that's the ultimate, don't you think?
I think the one key is common sense. I mean, if your daughter is asking questions that your daughter wouldn't be asking, or somebody, whoever is calling you. Like I myself, just last week, got a call they were claiming to be from a credit card company from Cheyenne, Wyoming. And they said, your credit card just had a $9,000 transaction. Was it from you? And I said, no. And they said, okay, we have to connect you to the police department. That in itself sounded unreasonable. Credit card companies don't directly connect you to the police department in an American city. So I guess common sense comes into play, is my point. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Sri?
Yes, I mean, common sense does play a role, but I think in these video and voice cloning cases, what we need to really train, employees, especially those in the Treasury and finance departments, where money may be involved and stolen, they need to literally do this multi-factor authentication. So you need to have a phone call, you need to have a text, you need to have, email, multiple ways of making sure that you are indeed dealing with the person who they claim to be. Because if you can't verify it that way, you don't know who you are dealing with. And then I'll tell you why there's a problem with the younger generation. And, Dr. Goel is much younger than me, so please don't take it personally, Dr. Goel. I'm not talking about you, but I'm just saying that a lot of my students, for instance, I'm finding they don't pick up the phone and call. They don't. They'll just take some instructions from email and that's it. They're not used to talking to people. They will text, they will use email perhaps. Even email is getting very old-fashioned with them. And then the worst thing is they will use things like this Snapchat where, and this AI does too, it'll create issues for you and then self-delete or self-destruct. So which means you don't know where it went. It did the damage and then you can't even have access to it. It's not there. It's gone.
But with somebody like your daughter, how do you use faceted security features to make sure it is your daughter or somebody close to you?
My daughter says, Dad, I won't call you. So if somebody is calling you and telling you it's me, it's probably not me because I won't call you. She told me this. I couldn't believe that. She does not call me much. That's true. So, it's interesting. She says, literally, I'm there only when I'm in front of you and I'm talking to you. Otherwise, take it easy. It's not me. So it's very interesting. You do have to be very skeptical. That's really what you're saying. So.
And just to add to this, I would add, when we actually exercise our judgment and, use logical thinking, we actually end up flagging wrong people. For instance, like last summer, I was traveling to India and I did a large purchase, and the credit card company canceled my card, so I cannot do any more purchases. And I'm like, yes, I am not in United States anymore. I am outside the country, and it is legitimate. So I couldn't, So they actually got the wrong person. Yes, I was authenticated. It's my account. It's all right. And once I was traveling, they actually, due to their profiles, they wanted to investigate me more. But there are other people, they have this profile like of a terrorist and non-terrorist, but they just randomly choose people. Yeah, the real people are very clever and they are getting through. And these mechanisms actually end up catching the wrong people. So
I know
it's
you've, Dr. Sunita, I know you've already addressed this, my next question to some extent, but and it's sort of a self-explanatory question, but why traditional fraud detections fail in AI? Could you give us more specific or more technical examples or reasons why they fail?
Yeah, so what is the key thing is these traditional models are like supervised learning models, okay? So they work very well on the data they have been trained on, and very simply speaking, what they have seen, okay? But the reality of the thing is that if we are training them, let's say with 55,000 records, we are happy, okay, we have a very large data set, but we might only have 1,000 real fraud instances. So in my data set, I have only 1,000 data fraudulent examples, but 54,000 are non-fraudulent examples. So they learn a lot when they are being trained, but they'll end up learning everything about the class which is not important, which is non-fraudulent, because they are exposed to all these non-fraudulent patterns. So when they actually see real live data, they do not work very well. It's not a fundamental flaw with them. It's just like what they have learned. They haven't been exposed to real complex fraud patterns. And when that is compounded with the scarcity of like the real fraud data, then this problem exponentially grows because we don't have that many instances. And even if we have instances, due to sensitivity, sensitive information, we cannot access that, because okay, it is very highly sensitive data. We cannot share it in public domain, but that is the issue. So the traditional models work very well on this seen data instances, and that creates this class imbalance problem. So they are biased towards the majority class, which is non-fraudulent, where we have 54,000 instances, but they are not able to perform well if something new comes which they have not already seen, so.
I'm going to throw at both of you, a very general, open-ended question. GAN, the acronym. I don't want to cut into it and describe it myself because I don't want to give your words away from you. You explain it beautifully. Let's get into GAN for a little bit.
Yeah, so these are generative adversarial networks, and they are called generative because they are composed of two key neural networks. One is detector and the other is generator, okay? So what we do in the generator task is just to create synthetic data. And it creates synthetic data, but we want it to create synthetic data which almost mimics real data. Okay, and that is the unique strength about GANs, generative adversarial networks, that they are very well able to mimic the real data. And how do they do is like, let's you can see like even on the slide, we have an example of like identical monozygotic twins, meaning like very in simple terms, like, when there are identical twins of same gender, they can fool all the relatives, your friends and family. And then after next iteration, they are even able to fool the close family. And finally, the best thing is when the parents cannot distinguish who is who, and that is the point, like the generator actually learns about all these cues from the detector. How is detector able to discern between fabricated and real data? So it's almost like the generator has deployed a mole, and this the cops division, and it can learn all the tools of the trade, and then it uses that to actually create this new synthetic data. So with every iteration it gets better, and it is based on the game theory, so where it is like zero-sum game, so only one person is a winner, and in the end, the discriminator also works hard to be able to distinguish, clearly, but only the discriminator knows from which bucket the data instance is coming.
Dr.
Coming.
Dr. Sunita, I'm really enjoying this. I could take this with you till tomorrow morning, but I'm getting increasingly angry messages from the control center saying, wrap it up. So we better wrap this up before I get in trouble. Just a final word. I just have one quick question about you. I know you have a phobia of snakes, and Dr. Suri is just the opposite. He has an adventure for them. How did you two get to work together?
So I really enjoy working with Dr. Shri. I'm learning so much from him, and it is interesting because we complement each other. So he has tons of rich experience, which helps me actually gather insight, which is not available explicitly. So I think it's a very good.
I know you have a big session coming up next month. Is that correct? And I cannot wait for that. I will be there. So thank you for what you're contributing. We do need to wrap it up. We're out of time. Dr.
So
Shri,
Ed, let me make just one comment.
Sure.
Just so everybody understands. There's this picture that Dr. Goel has, so that you all will understand that this is a facial image generation thing. So what's happening is the generator is going to pick parts of actual human faces, okay, and combine it in a very convincing way and create a synthetic face that you will all think is a real face. That's what is going on here. So we are taking real frauds, and we are taking characteristics of real frauds, and then infusing them into elements of a synthetic fraud that has so many characteristics of the real fraud that you will not be able to distinguish whether it's a real fraud or not. That's what the GAN is.
Thank goodness for you and for Dr. Sunita. I'm sorry our time was so short. Yeah. This topic deserves a lot more time. Thank you both for being able to summarize in such short time. And we are done. Thank you. It's my honor.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, doctors. And so good. Such a hot topic right now. And I'm going to let's start with our last session, which is really about growing and building your brand. Dimitri Yimga is gonna take it from here. Because we're short on time, I'm gonna just hand it over to you, let you take it away, Dimitri, and let's bring this one home.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Good morning, all, and thank you again for being with us today. And good morning to Christine. Thank you for being with us and to share this great and very interesting topic we're going to be covering. Let me share my screen. Oh, am I the one sharing the screen, or is Christine going to be sharing her screen?
It looks like Christine is sharing it, so you can just continue.
Then that's fine. Yeah, I'm good with that. So Christine Hollinden is the founder and principal of Hollinden Growth Without Guesswork. It's a growth-focused company that serves accounting and advisory firm, private equity firm, and investment bankers and M&A advisory firms. She's here today to talk to us about leveraging a data-driven methodology to grow your practice. Very exciting. And since we're behind time, I'm just going to let her take over and give us the knowledge.
Great. Thank you so much. Glad to be here today. And we work on creating focused and scalable growth strategies for firms. What we've seen consistently, if we look at growth data, is that the firms that are growing intentionally and leveraging data, structure, and smart tools to drive their marketing and business development are growing faster and more sustainably. So in the next few minutes, we're going to cover some high-level framework for doing just that. I'll walk you through how to align your strategy around data, organize your expertise through content, and automate your outreach using, yes, some AI tools as well as automation tools without sacrificing quality. So first, what is data-driven methodology? We have data, and especially when we're talking about valuation, they use data all the time. They're using data to drive what they're doing in their work and methodologies to get there. And there are different methodologies, of course, in valuation. But this is about the strategic use of data to guide marketing and business development decisions and actions within our growth strategies. So, but what I want to emphasize here is not just about periodically looking at data. This is about systematically and consistently using first and third-party data to guide the decisions. This scales everything from positioning to post-sale nurturing. And some of the big benefits are, first of all, it makes it a lot easier to track ROI. If there's anything I've heard throughout my career, it is, how do we see that it's working? What's the ROI or MROI, the marketing return on investment, that we can expect? How quickly can we expect that ROI or MROI to get a return? And this enables, when we're using that kind of data, it enables us to really track toward goals, track toward milestones, and measure that timeline and measure towards something that's real. It also helps us enhance our audience targeting. So gone are the days when we just throw things out there and we just hope that whatever sticks, it gets in front of the right person. With the tools today, we are able to really hone in and talk to specifically to the people who are going to use and leverage and ultimately buy our services. So gone are the days of just throwing stuff out there to general audiences and hoping somebody hears it, the right audience hears it. It also helps us align our strategy, align our implementation with our business goals. So I use a methodology to track back to business goals. I often start with the goals and then divvy those up by service line, geographic region, maybe industry sector, you name it, maybe referral source segments, what have you. And then I use a top down and bottom up kind of approach so that we get some very specific goals at every stage of the process. And as I mentioned, it's smarter, ultimately resulting in smarter decisions at every stage of the funnel. So first strategy I want to talk about is called pillar-based content. And pillar-based content is centered around pillar content. Now, what pillar content is, which a lot of people don't understand, is pillar content is a flagship resource on a core topic. So that means it's something very, very essential that tracks back to your services, industry sectors, that is key to something that they're looking at, like a real big core topic. Now, from there, you create, and that's called a pillar. So from there, you create clusters. So think of it like a spoke with a wheel with spokes coming out. The spokes would be the clusters, and that very center piece would be your pillar. So this centralized, maybe think of it like a 20,000 or 30,000 foot piece of content. And then we get more and more narrow from there. The reason why we really want to think about pillar-based content, why it works so well, is that first of all, SEO really reward this kind of structure within any kind of content strategy. And secondly, humans appreciate it. They appreciate the knowledge, and they tend to, when they read one piece of content or a knowledge article, they tend to have questions. And so a way to build this out, say a pillar page in a pillar-based content strategy, is to start with that key topic and then have cluster content that links off of that content, that pillar content. So for example, you could have a piece of content, say, on business succession, let's say. And some of your supporting cluster content might be how to value a business for succession, could be tax strategies for ownership, transition, or transfers, family business transition pitfalls, key traits of a successor CEO, and even something like ESOPs versus direct sale, pros and cons. So these are high stake kind of topics for business owners, and they're centered around businesses, in this case, business succession planning. The thing we want to emphasize then is on that pillar page and think about, are there other questions that they might ask? So let's say if it was about business succession planning, then what would you want to do? What kind of question might a business owner have in regard to after they read an article about general business succession planning? So, tax strategies. What are the tax implications if I select this strategy over the others? And you can ask questions, and at the bottom of the page, you can even put questions that link to other cluster articles on it. So that's one strategy. Another growth strategy using data is that SEO practices. Now, we all know search engine optimization is the key to being found. We need to get out there. We need to come up on really the first page at a minimum of the second page. Stats have shown that people just don't go past page 2 anymore. And the numbers that go past page 1 of search engine results is really getting less and less. So we have to start with keywords and phrases. So the first thing I recommend is thinking like a prospect. What information are they seeking when they think about your services? What questions do they have? And sometimes this content strategy of using pillar content and SEO, really, they often go hand in hand, because you're thinking about questions when you're creating those cluster content pages, those cluster content articles. And when you're doing SEO, you're also thinking about questions. Now, there's lots of data out there, Google Search Console, SEMrush, Ahrefs, Google Analytics has a lot. You can go to other kinds of tools. There's lots of tools out there, paid and free, that will give you data about what and how your target audiences are searching for people like you.
So sorry for interrupting. This is really amazing stuff. Just because we're running out of time, if you were to give like a summary wrap up, like what can our audience take away from this? And this is great stuff. We just talked about AI and now data and SEO. What would that be?
Yeah, so I would tie, the big thing is tie the content to the SEO. Those should go hand in hand. And if you do those two things and do some very basic SEO, you're going to come up. And then you use some tools like marketing automation that streamlines the processes. Use some things around AI in either predictive analytics or personalization, chatbots, for example. Then that really saves you time, which ultimately saves you money. So let me just skip to a couple because I know we're running out of time, but I would start looking at the data. What's working? Where there are gaps? And then use that data to make intentional decisions around how to build more awareness, leverage the pillar content to structure your expertise. It's not just about SEO, it's about showing depth and breadth of your knowledge. Automate and personalize to add the value and demonstrate that you're speaking person to person. Then let AI enhance your team's efficiency and insight by using it properly. And then follow the data. Reference the data frequently on a very consistent basis, and you'll see things really enhance.
So talking about AI, I know there's a diverse language model out there. Like, which one would you recommend for this?
So the two tools I recommend, and I happen to be certified in AI prompting, so that's how you get the best results. You can use ChatGPT, but I would not recommend using the free version. You're not going to get the same results. Perplexity is another tool I really think does a great
I've heard
job
about, yeah, I've used
for
Perplexity too.
research. Yeah, it's very powerful. But I would try those two to start with. And there's some,
What about Gemini?
pretty good. Gemini's pretty good for certain kind of things. You just have to watch for what's called hallucinations with the AI tools. It'll make up things and it'll try to please you.
Yeah.
It'll just, it's like a puppy. It'll try to
That's
please
true.
you.
And I had a question come through the message where someone was asking if there was any software you would suggest.
So if we're looking at marketing automation tools, I'm a big fan of HubSpot. There's some, it has a starter package. So if you're a small organization, you can use the starter package, very affordable. You get the free CRM, which I really like that. And then again, if you're just starting out on analytics, Google Analytics has a lot of data. Google Analytics coupled with Google Search Console. You don't need to pay for some of the other tools. They get a little bit more complex. So it does take some expertise to really understand those.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. It's already days. And I know we definitely out of time, but this is great material. I mean, you need more time to dive into this. I mean, you can go all over. So yeah,
we do.
Appreciate it.
A lot
Thank
of
you.
the topics today, we needed more. But
yes.
Thank you, Christine and Dimitri. This is great stuff. Times are changing for sure. So with that, we've reached the end of this month's program. We will be back here on July 21st, 2025. If you want to be a guest on an AVW, reach out to Chinda. His email is here. If you've got any questions about it, or you want to make sure that you're getting CPE, you want to make sure that you're a subscriber. And I look forward to seeing y'all here on July 21st. Have an incredible day. Thanks again for being here.